Good evening or good morning, everyone. I have a handout. You can follow along with this. This year I have stepped back from the grants process. I've been doing it for 25 years. I now am working not quite full time. I really tired of the late nights with the grants process in the fall, where I could be there 3 nights a week till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So now I'm just running the food pantry. I'm running per jury, and I'm helping to train a new guy who's going to do the grants process. But I'm here mainly to talk about the food pantry and the needs in the community. And I put my glasses on here. So a lot of people are surprised when they hear that Trier Township has a food pantry, that there are people in this community that are struggling. All of you live here in the township. We know this is a wealthy, very well-to-do area with a high median household income in excess of about $150,000 per year is the median household income in Trier Township. So they're kind of surprised to learn that there are people in the community that are struggling, that have difficulty paying their bills, that require the use of a food pantry. And I'm going to talk about that. In order to use the township food pantry, you have to be a Trier Township resident. We don't serve the homeless. We don't serve people who don't live in the community. Now, if somebody comes to the township and is homeless, I will give them a bag of food, but the limit is 1 time in 6 months. In order to use the pantry on an ongoing basis, you have to prove residency. That is, should have an ID with your address on it. You have to provide a utility bill. Okay, that's how people have to prove residency. Before the pandemic hit, we had income guidelines as well. Our board suspended the income guidelines when the pandemic hit. They are talking about reinstituting the income guidelines, but for right now, there are no income guidelines for the township. I can assure you that 99% of the people who use the food pantry probably would fall below the income guidelines that we had before, which were 250% of the poverty level. That would be an income basically for $130,000 per year. If your family size is higher than that, it would go up a little bit, but not a lot. But right now there are no income guidelines, so that actually makes my job and the social worker's job a lot easier, because we don't have to track people's income, we don't have to ask for all this documentation. They just get to use the food pantry. How many people are currently using the food pantry? Well, I can tell you that in the month of July, actually the data on here is a little outdated. Let's see here, yeah, so in the month of July, we had 265 visits to the food pantry. You can come twice a month, once every 2 weeks. We had 265 visits in July. The month before, we had about 270 visits. That was the highest number we've ever had. We've been averaging 250 visits a month since we reopened the food pantry in July of 2022. Before that, during the height of the pandemic, our doors were closed and that people couldn't come in and shop. We would drop a bag of food out in front of the building for them. They could come in the front door, in the vestibule. We would give them a bag of food. They just had to show us some ID, and we would drop off a bag of staples for them, and they could tell us what 2 meats they wanted out of the fridge. We would get them 2 meats. It was interesting, when the pandemic first hit, our numbers actually dropped. A lot of food pantries numbers dropped because people were scared. They didn't know what to expect. We didn't know enough about the pandemic and the different variants of the disease itself. So people stayed home. That's what they were supposed to do. And we were just dropping off a bag of staples in the front door. Well, once we let people start shopping again, they started coming back in droves, because people prefer to pick what they want for themselves off the shelf rather than being given a bag of staples. So 260 visits, averaging about 250 a month for the last year. These numbers do not include special situations, deliveries to low-income housing units, transients, and other special situations, like a homeless person that comes, I will give them a bag of food. We don't count those in our numbers because we don't scan in a card that tracks the data for them. We just give them a bag of food. I have about 1 person a week who comes to the pantry. and just wants some food. So we don't give them the produce, we don't give them the meat, they don't have any way of cooking it, but we'll give them a bag of staples. Right now, clients can pick what they want on the shelf within certain limits. So they get a blue bag from us that is about the equivalent of 2 grocery bags. They can fill that up off of our shelves. They can't take more than 2 of anything pretty much off the shelves, no more than 2 bags of cookies or crackers. They can take 2 meats out of the freezer, which is like a bag of chicken breasts. 6 chicken breasts would count as 1 meat, or a package of 4 pork chops, or a 1-pound package of hamburger. Any of those things is their choice. They can take 2 meats out of the freezer. They get a bag of produce. It's worth about $25. And they get to pick 2 dairy items out of the fridge, and then all the non-perishable stuff. You know, they can take 2 cans of fruit, 2 cans of tuna, whatever they want off the shelves that fits in that 1 bag. They also get a bag of paper goods each time they come in. It's got 2 rolls of toilet paper, a box of Kleenex, or a package of napkins, and a roll of paper towels. And then we have a non-food area. They can take 2 personal hygiene products and 1 cleaning product from the shelves. If we have it, this assumes we have all these things. We don't always have all these things. So, having said what people can get in the pantry, it's about $100 worth of stuff is my estimate they get when they come into the food pantry. We also give a laundry detergent each time they come in. How many of you have seen laundry detergent strips, not liquid, but strips? Yeah. Yeah, it's not even available yet in a lot of stores, but it's actually half the price of detergent. It's more environmentally friendly. Doesn't come in these big plastic packaging, which winds up in landfills. So it's a win-win for everybody. It works just as well as liquid. So, so all that stuff is worth, our estimate is about $100 worth of stuff. Which, I think about $100 worth of stuff the last 2 weeks. Nobody can live off just a food pantry. Pantries are meant to help low-income households stretch their budget. Okay. So who's using the food pantry? Okay, we all know that this is a very well-to-do area. As I said before, people are surprised that the numbers are as high as they are in our food pantry. Well, there's something I came up with I call the 8 Ds. Okay, it's kind of the 8 Sherry Ds of social work. And so everybody has a deficiency of resources. Okay, that's number 1. Why is that? One is they might be the working poor. Okay, they just don't make enough money. Could be seniors on fixed incomes. Inflation. We know inflation has been very high for the last few years. The changing nature of the economy. Jobs are more temporary now. Contractual employees, layoffs are more common. You don't get benefits as often as you used to with jobs right now. People with disabilities that are working tend to be part-time jobs. These are all things that cause people not to make enough money. Displacement or job loss. Now, the unemployment rate is at historic lows right now, but inflation is high, and food pantries around the country are reporting record numbers because of the structural changes that are going on in the economy right now. Generally, the middle class is shrinking. Okay, income is becoming more concentrated at the top. Okay, and the number of people that are falling at or below the poverty line is increasing. The single biggest reason why people use the food pantry, though, is disability and disease. And unfortunately, those tend to be permanent users, where displacement is temporary. Okay, there's a lot of people that come in and out of the food pantry over the years. They get a job, they don't have a job. It's a temporary job, it doesn't pay a lot. They come in and out of the food pantry. But people that have a disability or disease are permanent users. And of the roughly 175 registered users in the pantry, I would say 40 to 50% of the people who use the food pantry have a disability or a disease, and they are going to be using the food pantry for the rest of their life. They live in the community, but they need a pantry to survive. And the most common disability in the community is mental illness. People who are mentally ill can function fine for some of the time, a lot of the time, and then when they start hearing the voices or the depression sinks in, or a combination of both, they can be completely non-functional. Or some people that have developmental disabilities, can work, maybe not full time. Mental illness can be very debilitating. Like I said, about 40 to 50% of our clients in the food pantry have some sort of disability which renders them unable to work full time or sometimes even part time, or a disease like Parkinson's or muscular dystrophy or ALS are all things that can be put on people. The other D's in the community, drugs and alcohol. Okay, there are people who use the food pantry who are, have addiction issues and they struggle. Addiction is actually much more common with people that have mental illness. It's a dual diagnosis. Divorce can cause families to use the pantry. One spouse leaves another, and husband leaves the wife, and while it's tied up in court, there's no support being paid or whatever. The mother has to use a food pantry to feed herself or her family. Desertion, that's when one spouse deserts another. I can give you some examples. For example, we had someone who just started using the food pantry where the husband had the typical six-figure job around here. They had a nice home, a nice car and everything. They had 2 children. One of the children has a severe disability. And unfortunately, the divorce rate for families where a child has a disability is much higher than the national average. It is much more difficult, even with high income families, to raise a child with a disability. And the mom was a stay-at-home mom because the child has severe disability. Family gets a divorce, okay? But the father had a 6-figure job. He's paying the child support. The mother stays in the house. The father moves in an apartment. Then he loses his job. Okay, so suddenly he has no income. Family runs through their savings. Mother has to move out of the house into an apartment, and now she's using a food pantry because she really can't work very much because they have a child with severe disability at home. So that's an example of how somebody can be in a situation. Another example, desertion, where a husband and wife each made about $30,000 to $35,000 a year. Okay, not a lot in this community, but they have 2 children. But $70,000 your combined income is not bad. You can do okay. Well, the mother left. The father just took off and left him with 2 kids. So suddenly his income is cut in half, and now he has to pay for child support, for child care. Okay, and so now he's using a food pantry. That's how he helps himself. That's how they help stretch their budget. So the last one I'll mention of the 8 Ds is domestic violence. And people are shocked to learn that domestic violence is actually more prevalent in higher income communities. It tends to be more hidden because people have resources there, but domestic violence is more prevalent in higher income communities than it is in lower income communities. Drug abuse is more prevalent, and alcohol is more prevalent in lower income communities, but domestic violence is more prevalent in high income communities. There's a lot of pressure around here for people to be successful. People put pressure on their children, pressure on themselves, and when they're not, they sometimes take it out on other people. And so there are households who are using the food pantry because the wife wants to get away from an abusive husband. She gets away from a bad situation, but while she's doing that, she has no income or resources. So there are examples of people using the food pantry because of that situation. Fortunately, that's usually a temporary situation. So those are the 8 Ds of social work, and that covers most of the reasons why people are using our food pantry. But as I stressed, disability disease is the most common. It's permanent, and most of the people that use the food pantry, I've been seeing the same people for years and years and years because they can't work. So the pantry operations, I'm the only full-time staff person who works in the food pantry. Everything else is done by volunteers. We have a group of young adults with disabilities who come into the food pantry every morning from 9:30 till 11:30 or so. They store food, they stock the shelves. And then I have a pantry pal, an adult who comes in the afternoons every day to help stock the shelves and sometimes help clients carry stuff out. Not all clients are able to carry the food out themselves. Fill up the fridge and freezer and so on. So it's all volunteer based except for myself. We depend upon the community for donations to keep the pantry shelf stocked. We do have a budget. The annual budget for the pantry is about $100,000. Okay, that's not a lot of money. That buys us our meat and our produce and a little bit of our paper goods that we give out. But about 85 to 90% of all the non-perishable stuff in the food pantry comes from donations from the community, through food drives, through churches and synagogues, through schools, through Rotaries, through organized food drives that we do in front of the Grand and the Jewel here in the community, from stuff and bins that we put in schools and banks and places of business. All those things bring in enough food for us to keep the pantry operating. And part of that is building relationships with groups like yours. We do get the paper goods that we get, as I mentioned, every client gets a paper goods bag. That's about 50-50. About 50% of that we have to buy, and about 50% we get from donations. And then the challenge for most pantries, and ours is no exception, is to have choices available for clients. They have, how many of us want to live on canned food only? None of us. Okay. So choices for a pantry person means coming in and having to be able to pick 2 dairy items out of the fridge: milk, eggs, cheese, butter, yogurt, type of dairy items we usually have. I can't tell you how much clients appreciate getting that produce bag every week that we do have to buy. That has, apples or oranges in it, lettuce, cucumber, tomatoes. They can make a salad out of that produce bag, and there's some fruit in there. When we weren't giving out produce bags during the pandemic, people always asked, when are you going to do produce? When are you going to do produce? Well, it isn't safe for us to be handling it, having produce in the fridge and having people handle it and everything. So we didn't do produce then. Now we are, and people really appreciate it. So our challenge is to have choices on the shelves. Most pantries will tell you that from about mid-September through the holidays, I don't have to work terribly hard to get donations in, and people just naturally are more generous then. They're thinking about how they can give. And then after the first of the year, the donations slow down a little bit, but I still have a lot of schools that do food drives for us. During the summer, I get very little in terms of donations. So I have to do a monthly food drive in front of either the Grand or the Jewel from, say, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. I do one food drive a month in front of one of those stores, and that brings in a lot of stuff. But the rest of the year it's too cold to ask people to hang out in front of the store for 2 to 3 hours. So the food comes in a little bit quicker than it goes out from, say, now until the first of the year. Okay, my shelves will gradually get filled up. And then it goes out a little bit quicker than it comes in, at, say, from about spring through the summer. So that by the end of the summer, my shelves are pretty sparse. And whatever excess money I have in the budget that I don't spend on meat and produce and a few other staples, I tend to spend during the summer, because the demand for our services goes up during the summer. And that's because a lot of families who get their kids get fed at school through the free or reduced lunch program, and so they don't use the pantry during the school year. Then during the summer, their kids aren't getting fed at school, so they come to the pantry to help feed those additional mouths. I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but how many kids do you think at New Trier High School has? Right now, the numbers are down a little bit. There's about 3,600 kids at New Trier between the 2 campuses. How many kids out of 3,600, what percentage are on the free or reduced lunch program? Anybody care to guess?
5%.
Pardon?
5%. 5%.
You're very close. It's about 4% of kids at New Trier on the Trier Township. So, 3,600, 10% would be 360, 5% would be 180, just under that. So that's roughly 170 kids that are on the free reduced lunch program in New Trier. People are shocked to learn that there's that many low-income households in the community. It will tell you that there are a lot of families that move into New Trier Township who cannot afford to live here, but they want their kids to go to a good school. And, you know, the schools here are some of the best in the country. You're paying high taxes for that. You all know that. But the schools here are much better than what you will find in the city and many of the surrounding communities. They have more resources here, especially if you have a child with a disability. Okay. The programs available for kids with disabilities in other communities are not nearly as good as what you have here in this community. So there are families who bring their child with disability into New Trier Township because they're going to get better services at the school. So that's just the reality that you did. It's a fact. So some of those families live in the community until their kids get out of school and then they move out. So those are, a lot of those families start using the food pantries in the summer, so my numbers tend to go up during the summer, even as my resources, the donations slow down. So why should your church get involved in doing something with the pantry? That's why I'm here to pitch for you to do some sort of project for us. There's lots of things that you could do, but so there's a perception that New Trier Township is a very wealthy community. There aren't any needs here. I can tell you that that's just not true. You know, the numbers in our pantry prove that there are needs. They're not as high as some other communities, you know, like Northfield Township. This township has 56,000 people in it. You know, part of our borders are Lake Michigan, so unless I have to start feeding fish, they're not going to be as high as Northfield Township, which has roughly 100,000 people. So, you know, we have, you know, 250, 260 visits a month. They have 500 to 600 visits a month with Northfield. I grew up in Des Plaines. Okay, Des Plaines is a nice community. It's not as wealthy as this area. It's a community of about 80,000 people. They have 1,000 visits a month to their food pantry. Okay, your donation would be helping people who live in this community. These are your friends, they're your neighbors. They have, you know, these are kids who go to school in your area. These are families who live in the community. How many of you know about the low-income housing that's in New Trier Township? Junior, you do, I know. You're helping some of them. The senior center would help some of those. There's a 90-unit low-income housing unit in Wilmette on Linden called Shoreline Place, and almost all the residents there are seniors or people with disabilities or both. And so a significant number of our users come from there. The thing about needing a food pantry is going to strike anybody at any time. I can give you lots of examples of people who around here who thought they had it made, and some sort of tragedy strikes, a disability or disease, or a spouse passes away, loss of job, loss of a very high paying job that is very difficult to replace these days. So these are the kind of situations that put people in needing of a food pantry. So what kinds of things can people do for our food pantry? Number one, you can do a food drive. These are the most successful ways that we get food into the food pantry. So we just had one at Grand Foods yesterday. I had a youth group from a local church, the Divine Mercy Parish over on Tower Road. They had one adult and 3 to 4 kids there between 10 and 4. And as they walk into the food pantry, as they walk into the store, they have a sign posted, we're doing a food drive. Here's a flyer they give them. This is what the food pantry needs. Things on it like cookies, crackers, granola bars, pasta and pasta sauce, personal hygiene items were on the list. canned chicken, canned tuna, canned salmon. These are the most common things that we need in the food pantry, peanut butter and jelly. I got 4 carloads full of food from that event yesterday, about 30 bins that were, I don't know, this high and this big, full of food. That's a good month to 6 weeks supply of food for the food pantry. That's one thing that you can do. Those drives tend to work better with kids. You know, when kids ask, they're cute, they're fun, they're more outgoing and vivacious, and we tend to get better results when kids do the asking. So, or you could have a food drive within your church where you ask people to bring something to a service or to a meeting or something, and I'm happy to come and pick it up. Those don't do as well as the food drives. The other thing that you can do, you want to do something kind of hands-on, is that every client who comes in the food pantry gets a bag of paper goods. And so I have to buy about half the paper goods, or I have groups that do paper goods drives and they pack the bags for me. I supply a little bag I get from Grand Foods. You put a paper towel, 2 toilet papers and a Kleenex in there, you tie the bag shut, and I come and pick it up and deliver it to the food pantry. It's a nice project. You could make 100, 200, however many bags you wanted to make. You know, it takes you half an hour to an hour. You're working together on an assembly line. It's kind of a bonding experience. And I can give a talk to the group as well about the food pantry. You can have drives within the church. You can make a financial contribution. We have several funds with the township. As I mentioned, the township budget for the food pantry is $100,000 per year. That doesn't begin to meet the needs in the community. 85 to 90% of our food, non-perishable stuff, is donated. So we accept financial contributions. My dollar will go farther at the local stores than yours will, because I get a bulk discount. But also, we have something that we call the Township Angel Fund. Okay, and that your deduction, your donation is tax deductible if it's an individual donation. And the Angel Fund is a separate 501c3 set up by the township that gives us some flexibility to help some families who might not be eligible for regular governmental assistance. The township doesn't just do a food pantry. We have general assistance, we do child care, daycare scholarship assistance for low-income families. We do some assistance with prescription drugs for eligible families. But not everybody falls under those guidelines. We can also, through the Angel Fund, help families that might not otherwise be eligible.
I think Greg had a question, did you?
Oh, many. I don't want to interrupt though.
Yeah, I'm just about to finish. The other thing I will mention is that this is about the township in general. The township's annual budget, we all know we get to the tax levy. You look at your tax bill and you've got, levies for different things. The schools, obviously, is the big one, the villages, the park districts, the special recreation association, libraries, police and fire, and so on. The township's annual budget is $3 million with the tiniest tax levy on your tax bill, okay? The township is really not government. We don't have any authority to do things like, we don't maintain streets, we don't do fire, we don't do police. The township does social services. That's all that we do. We don't have any authority over anybody in the village. We don't have, we don't write tickets. We don't enforce the laws. We help people who live in your community. And of that $3 million, almost $2 million of it is going out in the form of grants to local nonprofits to serve the community. How many of you are aware of the North Shore Senior Center? Township gives them over $100,000 per year. Their budget's $7 million, but they're getting over $100,000 from the township. How many of you are Haven?
Yeah.
Haven is the senior center equivalent for youth. Haven provides all the services for youth in this community. Youth who are in danger of being taken out of the home, youth who are having individual or family crisis. How many of you heard of one of the family service agencies in the community? Family Services of Winnetka Northfield, or Family Service. These are agencies that do individual and family counseling. they do it on a sliding fee scale based on your income, because the township provides subsidies to them in order to be able to serve families who can't afford to pay the full fee. If your income, if you need family counseling and your income is $150,000 a year or more, you're gonna pay the full cost of that service, which is $150 an hour. But if your income is only $40,000 a year, it still costs the agency the same amount of money to provide that service. But you're only gonna pay $30 or $40 an hour for that service because of the subsidy that's provided by Trier Township. We're funding agencies like Glencoe, Lamb's Farm gets some money from us because they serve some township residents. Substance abuse treatment, peer services. There's 40 different agencies in this community that are getting a total of just under $2 million from the township. These are agencies that provide important human services in the community, and because the township, some townships offer their own daycare center, their own youth care center, their own counseling center. We don't do that. We provide funding for local nonprofits that can provide those services. So we have the smallest township staff in the whole state of Illinois. There's 4 people that work for Trier Township, other than the property tax person. I'm not counting them. There's 4 people that do social services in Trier Township. That's it. So, anyway, thank you very much for listening. Any questions about the food pantry or township services?
Very well presented.
Yes,
I have 2 questions. One is for the people who live in the low income housing, which is in Wilmette, and you're in Winnetka. Can they all drive? How do they get
No.
their food? So is there a transportation need?
Well, a significant number of people that use the township food pantry have to come by bus. And so one of the things that we do is, we realized a while ago was a lot of people that were coming by bus. We used to do grocery bags, but now we have cloth bags because the grocery bags break if you have to carry them. So, some of those low income housing units have a van.
Yeah.
That they bring a group of people to come and shop at once at the food pantry, so that helps. Sometimes one person who drives may bring somebody along who doesn't drive. And we do, in special situations, we will deliver to people. I know our boss doesn't like it because of liability reasons, but we've all done deliveries to people in the community who are hurting, that can't get to the pantry, so.
My other question was, if there's, other questions about this, or whether if you could talk about the peer
Yeah,
jury.
with your mask on, you're a little muffled.
If you could talk about the peer jury.
Oh, sure. I mean, if you want to hear about the peer jury, I also started something called the peer jury in the community. This is in 1997, when I first went to work for the township. I retired because of my experience with evaluation of nonprofit organizations, and the township wanted to move away from just funding based on numbers and to ensure the organizations are getting results. But I said, hey, this is a perfect community to have what's called a peer jury. You have 5 communities, 5 police departments, Wilmette, Winnetka, Kennewick, Glencoe, Northfield. Let's create something called a peer jury, where the police departments will divert some juvenile cases away from the juvenile court system and send them to a peer jury, providing the kid agrees to plead guilty. So I get cases from all 5 police departments. Some of these are felony cases. It doesn't take much to do a felony. It's $500 worth of damage is a felony. You know, kid breaks a window at school. It's going to be a felony. And so the kid will go in front of a jury of their peers, along with their parents and the police, the arresting officer. They'll ask the kid a lot of tough questions. We try to have some sort of restorative justice concept, a way for the kid to address the wrong. So these kids are all going to wind up doing community service. They may have to write a written paper. They may have to write an apology letter. I will tell you, the most effective apology letter we have kids write is not to a victim, okay? Because in juvenile law, a victim is not entitled to know who the perpetrator is in juvenile law. Whereas if any one of us were to, get arrested in the community, our name's going to be in the police blotter. If you're a juvenile, your name is not in the police blotter. Okay, that's to protect juveniles. And so even if, as I was talking to the pastor before, you could have a kid that could damage this church, vandalize this church, you don't have the right to know who that kid is. So anyway, the kid will get, the apology letter that we have kids write that's the most effective is to their parents. Because who is it that kids let down when they get in trouble? It's, yeah, you know, you can say they violated the community, okay, the community will get over it. It's their parents they let down. And having a kid read an apology letter in pure jury in front of their parents, I assure you, was a very powerful experience. We often see tears, you know, families, you know, bond over that, and, you know, parents have to learn to trust their kid again sometimes. So kids will get asked a lot of tough questions in pure jury. They'll ask the parents questions, they'll ask the police officer questions. They get assigned to community service. Maybe, you know, half of our cases, they have to do some sort of written assignment. 98% of our kids will get the sentence done, get a good evaluation from their community service site, and not get in trouble again. So, whereas in the juvenile court system, the recidivism rate is 40 to 50%. So, now, that's a little self-serving because generally speaking, the police are not going to send us, you know, kids who are habitual troublemakers. These are generally good kids who've done something stupid, like all of us have when we were kids, right? And so they learn their lesson. And they avoid having a juvenile record, which is a big deal around here. You know, colleges now access that information. The biggest thing is, you know, if your kid is getting a driver's license, insurance companies have access to if you have a juvenile record or not. If your kid has a juvenile record, you're insured. We all already know that kids pay higher insurance rates as they should. If you got a juvenile record, it's going to be even higher. So it's a win-win for everybody in the community, and you know, if you have parents appreciate it for the most part because they avoid having to go to juvenile court, which if you go to juvenile court, it's recommended you hire an attorney, which is going to cost you a minimum of $1,000. So we don't allow attorneys in pure jury. Kids have pled guilty, so it's a win-win for the community. We've since I started the program in '98, we've heard almost 1,000 cases. So with a 98% success rate, only 1 out of 50 kids doesn't get their sentence done for whatever reason. Okay, and they get bounced back in the juvenile court system. Yeah.
Does Northwood have this program? I live in Northwood.
Northbrook does not have a pure jury. Northbrook does something a little bit different. We tried to get them into the program. They have their own program where kids, instead of going through pure jury, they get sent to the Youth Services Bureau in Northbrook. It used to be Nancy Bloom. And they go through like a 10-hour program on decision-making and other kinds of skills that avoid having
The parents.
something. The parents have to be part of it. Yeah, the parents have to, I think, attend 2 of the hours. So, but we don't think that has as much power as the pure jury program does. So,
I'd be curious following through on that. Because I live in Covenant Living and we get involved a lot with the food pantry. Because we have a very prosperous garden with over 50 plots of vegetables. And they're thriving, and weekly there are shipments over to the food pantry.
yeah, I get stuff from the Glencoe Community Gardens, and then Wilmetta's thinking about starting the community gardens as well, and we hope maybe we'll get some of those donations as well. I also get stuff from the farmers market on Saturdays.
Oh, good.
So, other questions? Yeah.
Does your personal products area include diapers?
It does, yes. We don't put diapers on the shelf because it takes up so much space, and I don't know, Ben, how many of you have ever been to our food pantry? We're a rather small food pantry. So if clients want diapers, they can just come and ask me, or they can ask somebody else there, we'll go downstairs and get it for them. Yeah, I will tell you that there are not a lot of households that with babies that are using the food pantry right now. In fact, this is sort of an interesting commentary, you know. The social safety net of Medicare and Medicaid that was established, you know, starting in the 50s and 60s and 70s, has really changed the whole nature of poverty in this country. It used to be in the 60s, the seniors were were the segment of society that was the most likely to be living in poverty. Now seniors are the least likely to be living in poverty. That's because of Social Security and Medicare, a social safety net that's very well established. And now you're more likely to be a young person with children, families with children, or a person that has lost their job, or a person with disability that is living in poverty. Seniors are now the most well-off segment of American society right now, at least in terms of, it doesn't mean there aren't seniors or food pantry, there certainly are. But it's not like it was in the 60s and 70s, and that's because of the social safety net that exists. So that's why I'm really scared, not to get political here, but why there's talk of cutting Social Security and Medicare, and so many people depend upon it.
That's part of the flag they wave.
Did the US government or the state fight you at all on peer review?
On what?
On the peer review idea that it was yours?
Yeah, that
Peer jury,
pure jury.
yeah.
What about it?
Did the state or the federal government have ideas that were opposed to your?
No, nobody, you know who was opposed to our peer jury program was lawyers. Because, when I brought the idea to the community, 4 of the 5 police departments were initially very supportive. One of the police departments said, parents around here are kind of different because they think they can buy their way out of everything because there's a lot of money around here. And it's true, there are. But now, all 5 police departments are very supportive. We've had cases. Every department in this community, including Kennewood, which is the smallest of police, has had at least 1 year where we got the most cases from that department. So, lawyers were against it because, clients have to plead guilty in order to come in front of peer jury, and so that eliminates the need for a lawyer. The kids have pled guilty, they've agreed to abide by the decision of the peer jury, and so there's not really, it's not an adversarial process. Kids come in, they've admitted their guilt. We're not here to, generally, they don't dispute the facts, and we're just here to figure out what's this kid's demeanor, what was his reason for doing this, impress upon him the impact that his actions had upon himself, his family, the community, the victim, and so on, and then come up with a sentence that's a form of restorative justice. So there's not really a need for an attorney, and there was a few attorneys who complained, so everybody's entitled to representation, and we said, well, if your kid doesn't want to plead guilty, then by all means go to juvenile court, but most parents would prefer to avoid going to juvenile court. They have to take a day off work to go to juvenile court during the day. You're going to sit there for half a day because you don't know how soon your case is going to get called up. Generally speaking, you have to hire an attorney. And the kid is going to miss a day of school while he goes to juvenile court, whereas we meet in the evenings. So it's a lot better. And so, only people who had any resistance to it were a few lawyers who called us upset about the fact that we were denying their client the right to representation. But
Of their job.
yeah,
I have a question about foods. The most, I think, the greatest staying power to prevent hunger, I think, comes from grains, and at least 2 billion people in the world eat rice. But do you provide? I mean, I think having a full stomach during the daytime is, dependent on how much you've eaten in carbohydrates usually, unless you eat a lot of protein. So do people? Do you provide rice to people and grains?
rice is an item on our shelf,
I mean,
absolutely.
because bags of grains, uncooked grains, are the least expensive means of nourishment. And I just
Well, people can choose for themselves what they want to take from the food pantry. I'm not there to be anybody's dietitian or monitor what their health intake is. People can choose for themselves. I will assure you that rice is always something that's on the shelf. It's one of the staples. Pasta sauce is a staple. The things that people take mostly from the food pantry are, when you can take your bag, almost everybody takes pasta. and pasta sauce. Almost everybody takes cookies, crackers, or granola bars. Almost everybody takes tuna, canned chicken, or canned salmon. That's the protein. They get a produce bag. I can tell you what people don't take a lot of. They don't take a lot of macaroni and cheese. They don't take a lot of canned stuff. And even though we have a lot of cans on the shelf, they don't go as quick. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If you're a low-income household, which everybody who uses the food pantry is, you know, we're not checking people's income right now, but it's most of the people that were using the food pantry before the pandemic are still using it. If you're limited in how much you can take from the food pantry, which you are, you can't take everything that you want. We couldn't stay in business. Are you gonna take something like macaroni and cheese, which you can buy in a box at the store for 99 cents? Okay. Are you gonna take a can of beans, you know, which is relatively inexpensive at the store? No, you're gonna take things off the shelf that are more expensive that help you stretch your budget. You know, what is a box of cereal? Everybody takes cereal. You know what a box? Who knows what a box of cereal costs in the store? $4 to $5 for a box.
Yeah.
Some of the healthier cereals, you know, it costs $5 to $7. You know, like this Quaker Oats 100% natural, or the family size of Raisin Bran is typically $5 to $6 in the store. The cheaper macaroni and cheese, not only is it cheap in the store, but you have to add milk, you have to add butter, you have to be able to cook it. And, you know, I'm not disparaging anybody's ability, but a significant number of our clients are mentally ill or have a developmental disability. They're not real skilled at cooking. So, you know, stuff that doesn't require a lot of preparation time is much easier for them to do. You know, it's unfortunate to say this, but a significant number of people who use the food pantry are probably a little bit overweight. And that isn't because they get enough to eat, it's because they don't eat properly. It is much more expensive to eat healthy. Okay, if a person is hungry and you say, here, have an apple, okay, which, you know, gonna cost you probably $1 to buy an apple, and fruit's expensive. You can get a quarter pounder with cheese at McDonald's for $1. Okay, which are you gonna pick if you're hungry? You're gonna take a quarter pounder with cheese every time. So it's expensive to eat healthy. So a lot of the food pantry clients don't eat healthy because a dollar goes farther that way. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. I'm not there to monitor people's food choices. So
is our time an issue here?
We've got about almost 10 minutes. Until 9:45. I've got to get to.
So think of what as a group, if you would like to do something for the food pantry, I mentioned some ideas. I would love to work with you. And we can help make an event a success. And as I said, we depend upon the community to keep the pantry shelves well stocked, to give people choices, and to help people in the community who need help. That's why we're here. So, the churches and the synagogues are integral parts of the community, and we'd like to help out. I'm open to ideas as well. And yeah, questions?
I know, I think that, you know, the people, the members of the church have to decide upon this, and we as a group to make that kind of a decision. Wouldn't that be the case?
Think about things like that.
In the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of noise and a lot of pressure. People wanted to get rid of the township, saying they could make their own decisions. And then, of course, there was the battle over links. Has all that died down? Do you feel any pressure to get rid of the township, or?
Oh, there's still some groups out there that want to get rid of townships, and you know, I'm somewhat sympathetic to their view. I mean, clearly there are too many units of local government in Illinois, and clearly Illinois is not one of the better run states in the country. You know, the pension system in Illinois is what needs to be fixed. Is that, you know, there's too much money, especially in education, going to pensions, and that's part of what the budget problem is in Illinois. And there was a Supreme Court decision a number of years ago that Bruce Rauner, the governor, tried to fix the pension system, and the Supreme Court told him he couldn't do it. So that's part of the issue with Illinois, but they have been getting rid of, they just got rid of Evanston Township. Because it didn't make sense that Evanston Township had the same borders as the city of Evanston. It was 2 units of local government. Schaumburg Township, for example, Schaumburg Township has the same borders as the city of Schaumburg and provides far more services than the city of Schaumburg does. So maybe there could be some merging there. Here in New Trier Township, which is what I'm familiar with, none of the villages provide any social services whatsoever. And if you were to get rid of New Trier Township, then you would have to have, each of the villages would have to have a food pantry, would have to provide some social service. It doesn't make sense. This is a well-to-do community. It makes more sense to have one unit that provides all the social services for all the towns in the area, okay? The alternative is if they got rid of the township, people in this community would have to go to the county to get services, which going downtown is not a pleasant prospect for a lot of people. First of all, it's gonna cost you money just to get downtown, $10 in train tickets probably to get downtown and back, wait in line. The county is not well known for its, nothing against the county does provide some good services here, but it's a major hassle to go that far out of your community to access social services. There are some not-for-profits in this community that would undoubtedly fold if they lost township funding, or would face significant challenges. So I'm sympathetic to the viewpoint that there's a lot of inefficiency in Illinois government. There certainly is. Is it at the township level? I don't think so. It's a little higher up.
Question regarding my Northwood situation. I've always been puzzled about the overlap between Northfield Township, in which Northbrook is. Could you help me out?
Well, that is confusing. And New Trier Township is all of Wilmette, all of Winnetka, all of Kenilworth, all of Glencoe. It's about half of Northfield. Everything that sits east of Hap Road
Because there's
is in New Trier Township.
a 60093, as does Winnetka have, as part of Northfield's mailing.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
60062.
There's a person who serves on one of my township committees who his house is on the border. She pays taxes to both Northfield Township and New Trier Township. And the school district of New Trier is actually slightly bigger than New Trier Township. So just I grew up in Des Plaines. I was in the Mount Prospect Park District, the Des Plaines Fire District and Police, Elk Grove Township, something mosquito abatement district. It's very confusing in Illinois. I certainly agree with that.
I think there's something like 450 townships in the state of Illinois, but I think New Trier Township is brilliantly run and has done a brilliant job in the breadth of the services that they cover.
Yeah, we don't do any road district maintenance. Some townships do road district maintenance, do cemetery maintenance. We don't do that. It's a lot of the downstate townships that, quite frankly, it doesn't make a lot of sense why they exist, but there's nobody in Illinois in there that's wise enough to say which township should stay and which should go. It's an all or nothing proposition. So, it doesn't make sense. Each of you guys live in an individual village. Why do we need 5 different police departments in New Trier Township and 4 different fire departments? You know how many fires there were in New Trier Township last year? There were 2. So, fire department do other things too, but, there's certainly some opportunities, I would argue, for a merger between police and fire in this community, but communities around here tend to be somewhat insular. They tend to take pride in themselves, and, there can be strengths to that. There's also weaknesses to that.
Nancy, you had one more
Oh,
question?
yeah, are youth groups part of your township support? Like the one at the community house?
Am I part of?
Yeah, do you fund like?
House?
Yeah.
We do not, actually, the community house came to us for funding maybe about 10 years ago. And I said to them, well, you know, you meet all our criteria, you're a 501c3, you have a volunteer board of directors. But I see in your sign in your building, it says, we accept no government funding. I said, you'd have to take that sign down, you know. And I said, and you know, we're not talking about a lot of money that you're gonna get from us. You know, you come in for initially, you know, like $5,000 or $10,000. I said, there's a lot of red tape for getting that money, a grant. They reconsidered. So there's a lot of not-for-profits that are located in the community house.
Yeah.
That pay rent to them as well, so.
So-
The community house does very well. So I belong to the fitness center there, or I have.
Thank you. Well, thank you.
Well,
It was
let
wonderful.
everybody get to church. Brian, thank you very much.
Thank you.